Welcome back to the History Bards podcast today. I'm host Dee Marley with my co-host Michael Zucker. Say hi.
Hi everyone.
And we are glad you're joining us today. We have the great privilege of featuring award-winning author Helena P. Schrader to the show today. And as a way of introduction, Dr. Helena P. Schrader is the author of 5 critically acclaimed nonfiction history books and 20 historical novels, 7 of which have earned 1 or more literary awards. She holds a PhD in history from the University of Hamburg, which she earned with a groundbreaking biography of a leader of the German resistance to Hitler, and served as an American diplomat in Europe and Africa. Helena's chief areas of expertise are ancient Sparta, the Crusader states, and the Second World War military aviation. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Helena. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a little hot.
Oh, yes.
Sweltering a bit.
Yes, I bet you are.
In fact, I've got a fan on. Is that bothering the sound in any way?
No, it's perfectly okay.
Good.
We have those too, because I'm in the South and we're sweltering as well. So to start off this interview, we would love to know more about you. Can you tell us about your journey as a writer and why you got started into historical fiction?
I've been writing essentially all of my life, and I've told the story before, but I really think it all started when I was in Rome with my father. My father was a professor. He was professor of industrial engineering or economics, and he was sent to Japan 10 years after the end of the war. And when we came back, we came around the world flying, via Hong Kong and Bangkok and Karachi and New Delhi. And we ended up in Rome, and then we rented a car and we drove through back to Denmark, which is where my mother's family was from, and from there. And I was 4. And, so my parents were two relatively a young couple with 3 daughters. The older 2 were 12 and 8, and me, 4. And we we went to the Colosseum in Rome. There was a guided tour, and my mother took one look at me and said, she's not going to be able to handle this, right? So Daddy takes me by the hand and does the daddy tour of the Colosseum in Rome, which was, this is where they fed the Christians to the lions. A 4-year-old attention,
right?
So I just I'm going through where do you think the lions were, and where were the Christians kept, and couldn't they have escaped up there? And I really believe that's where I got this. I started, in a sense, writing historical fiction because I was confronted with this idea of something that had happened in the past that absolutely fascinated me, or triggered so much imagination. And of course I went through slow development after that, but ultimately it was having been confronted at a very early age with something very tangible. It was a really historical building. I could walk through it, I could feel it, I could smell it, and something incredible had happened there. So that's how I started. And then since then, I mean, literally, I wrote my first novel when I was in 2nd grade.
Wow.
Right.
I understand.
But the idea of wanting to sit down and write a story and setting that story in a place I had seen or visited, but hadn't really lived. I from the very start, I was always wanting to put myself in someone else's shoes. I've never been pulled into autobiography. I feel like I've done that, been there, done that. What's always fascinated me was something different, and going into it and trying to understand it. So we'll stop there because I know you have other questions.
No, that's completely okay. It's really fascinating. And we would love to, I know our listeners would love to know more about your books, which I have to say, and you know how I feel about your books. You have a way of really putting somebody in the cockpit, when somebody's flying. And it's just really fascinating to me how you're able to do that. So for our listeners, can you tell us more about your books?
Well, we mentioned in the beginning that there are certain periods that for whatever reason, and I can't always tell you why. I can't tell anybody why, but something will trigger my interest, my imagination, and then I become interested. I want to know more about it, and then I start doing research, and I do so much research. I have a PhD in history. I'm not somebody who can just read one book and think I know the subject. I end up going and reading, and then after I've read up on a topic, I tend to have so much information and so many ideas that it becomes multiple books. That's why I have areas,
Yes.
I have clusters, because having written the first book on ancient Sparta, I still had so much information and things I wanted to share and so many other ideas that I went on and I ended up writing 6 books about ancient Sparta. And then
Yeah.
I realized I'm stale. I can't write another book about ancient Sparta without just repeating myself. Let's go on and do something else. Oh, excuse me. And I don't know what it's going to be next. There's often I have these transition periods when I'm not satisfied. I'm not happy with what I'm doing, but I'm not really inspired anymore. And then I'll go on a holiday. I know for the Crusader States, we went on holiday. Actually, my husband and I had booked a trip to Egypt. We wanted, one of these places here, on everybody's bucket list. We wanted to go to Egypt. And there was a terrorist attack. And
Oh,
20 or 30 tourists are killed at the Hatshepsut Temple. And Herbert and I my husband and I just said, no, we're not doing Egypt today.
yes, of course.
We will postpone that. And we did get to it later. So, in very short notice, we were both working high power jobs in Berlin. We were both, we needed a holiday. We needed to get away. So I went down to a travel agent and basically he said, where can we go that's hot and sunny and warm? On short notice, and we got a package deal to Cyprus. Who knows anything about Cyprus? I don't know, but it fit my criteria. It was hot, it was warm,
Yeah.
sunny at a time when Berlin was cold and rainy and dark. And I knew nothing about it, but I sort of assumed, Cyprus, Egypt, close to Egypt, Rome, whatever. I get there and discover that Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, conquered Cyprus in 6 weeks with 2 casualties, and that it ends up being a Latin kingdom for more than 300 years. This part, and there are these incredible castles, these magnificent. They're actually built on Byzantine ruins, but then they've been built up by the Franks on Corniche. They're so narrow that there aren't even courtyards in the normal fortifications that you have in castles, and they sit on the pinnacles of the mountains, and you can hardly tell that they're castles until you get close to them. They look like they're part of the rock. And my imagination was, and I ended up researching then the Crusader states from Cyprus. You get drawn into the history of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and I ended up again writing 6 books. And I actually planned 2 more on that period, but I also had reached that point of 6 books in 6 years after I'd done the research, because there's still a gap. I can't just write a book as soon as I go there. I have to go. But once I'd done, and I found out so much about the history of the Crusader states, and it's fascinating. And so I wrote a trilogy about Balian the Evelyn, the younger one, who's featured in the film The Kingdom of Heaven, but it was totally different. And then his son was probably more important than he ever was. And I ended up, going into the next generation, and I'd like to finish the book on his grandson, who was also very different personality, same name, Balian the Evelyn, but very, very different personality. But I had reached that same point after 6 books where I said, you're getting stale, you're saying the 2 things, you're saying too much the same thing over and over. You need a break, you need to get away from this, you need to, do something else. And that's when I ended up going back to an older book I'd written from having lived in the UK about the Battle of Britain. Yes. I got into that actually because I got this email from somebody saying, well, I'm trying to read your Balian book and you pulled it off the market. I said, yes, I'm rewriting that book, and I'm not satisfied with the way it was. But in the meantime, all I can suggest is maybe you want to read one of my other books. And so I told him what other books I'd written. And I then started getting these emails like, I can't put this down. Helena, I'm not getting my work done. My work is suffering.
Right.
The Department of State has to wait. I can't finish the book. And the only thing wrong with this book is that it ends.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's wonderful. You're feeling really good about yourself. And then comes this little kicker email that says, but as an Englishman, I did notice some Americanisms in this book, which sort of irritate.
Okay.
When you're writing about the RAF. And I said, and I wrote back, I said, I just thought I'd gone to a great deal of effort to get my RFEs right. And you said, your RFEs is perfect. It's the rest of them.
Oh, no.
So he said, look, would you like me to make these corrections? And I thought, oh, yeah, what the hell? Let's do this. They were over 1,000 corrections.
Oh, wow. Wow.
and you're thinking, no, this is not lorry versus truck. This is not, this was the British look out of the window. We look out the window.
Yes.
I'll go get the phone. No, I go and get the phone.
Yes,
And those little tiny things in our, it's not really word, it's not vocabulary, it's our, what do you call it, diction, it's our,
it is.
that. He found, and I realized other people were finding it irritating. So I thought, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to make 1,000 corrections, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to try to get more active voice in it. And I'm going to get, I'm going to get photo. I'm going to include photos. So I got the rights to some actual photos from the Battle of Britain, and I brought out a new edition. And in doing that research, I just got so sucked up in the period. I got so
Yes.
totally pulled back into that world that I couldn't let it go. I mean, it just enveloped me.
And you can
And so I
tell,
did.
you can definitely tell in your writing. That's what I was saying. It's like, I was just sitting there thinking to myself, how? It was like she was right there in the cockpit. It was just astounding to me.
Well, that's another issue, which, again, some people are uncomfortable with. But I think my writing it's a huge amount of research. It's very real, but it's also inspirational.
Yeah.
I get, first of all, the idea of what I'm going to write about. I don't sit down and plan. I don't look at what's logical. I don't say what's the market, what's trending. I get an idea and I have to write that story. And that's what happens. So having done the Battle of Britain book, as I say, quite a long time ago, and then done this rewrite, when I thought I was going to go back to the Middle Ages, I couldn't, because I had Kit Moran saying, no, I want you to tell my story.
Yeah.
And it was keeping me up at night. I was getting, I'm not just saying visions, because that makes it sound so kinky. I don't know. It's not like that, but it's like I'm trying to sleep and I think, oh no, we've got to look at that. I need to do this. I got to look at that more closely. I think there's something here. And then I get up in the next day and I track it down. And I go online and I research it, and then things fit together and things make sense. And then when I sit down to write, I'm one of these, they talk about, I'm not one of these people who has very detailed outlines. I know the overall structure of the book. I know where it's going to, but every scene I sit down and I sort of start with, okay, what perspective, what am I aiming for? And I sit down and write it. And that it just flows. That doesn't mean I don't rewrite it 7 times.
Yeah.
But if I don't have something that's telling me this is the scene, this is the perspective, that's what makes it work. And if I don't have that, it doesn't work, is what I was trying to say. So
yeah.
I think I got that.
That's awesome. So, Michael, do you have anything for Helena?
Yeah, so one question that I have is, given how prolific you are while also having, as you kind of said, a high-powered job as a diplomat, both, how do you have, or where do you find the time to write? And also just, are you a particularly fast writer?
When I was working full-time, I could only work on the weekends. And sometimes not even that, because what the State Department's like, and there's a Codell, or there's something coming through and you can't work. So the amount I could not write at the same rate. I've been retired for now 5.5 years, and that's when I have finally been able to devote the time to the writing I wish I could. Yeah. I think that when I was working full-time, there was the advantage of, when you're working on something else full-time with the week and very intensively, you're not thinking about the book at all. And I needed a transition time, which is one of the things I loved working in Africa, because we would work only half days on Friday, because the Muslim holiday is Friday afternoon. And so they closed the embassy at noon, and I would spend Friday afternoons transitioning, sort of unwinding, talking about the week, about what had happened at work, so that by Saturday, that was all out of the way. My husband and I had gone out to dinner and, discussed, and then I could concentrate from Saturday through Sunday on the book. And then I would work very, very intensively. And I came to it with a lot of energy, because ultimately, unconsciously, subconsciously, I'd been working on that book while I wasn't aware of it. And by the time I sat down on Saturday morning, I had all sorts of things I wanted to write. And the problem was always not having enough time to write. What suffered was social life. And if I had had children, I would never have had books. I've always said, my books are my children, because no mother can afford to simply turn the kids off and say, sorry, I'm doing it. Do that. I can say, no, I'm not going to take that invitation. No, I don't have to go to that cocktail party. I really don't care about that museum, exhibition or whatever. I could choose to write as opposed to doing social things. I couldn't have chosen to write, and if, as I say, if I had children. So the answer, Michael, is it's a combination of sacrificing other parts of my life, but not the work piece, and then using work in many ways as a way to recharge batteries. And I used a lot of what I saw. People find this, well, my Ethiopians, my Ethiopian economic officer read one of my books because I said, I was really inspired by what's going on here in Ethiopia for this book on the Crusader Kingdom. That's right. It's about Cyprus in 1182, after the fall at the Battle of Hattin, the fall of the Christian kingdoms, and Cyprus is in revolt against the Latin kings. Mm-hmm. And there's and Guy de Lusignan has almost nothing. And it was that the Greek rebels on Cyprus were destroying their own factories. The Latins had built sugar factories. I was describing the situation in Ethiopia with the rebellion that was going on in Oromo. And I was using the experiences that I saw. And that's true of all my books, that it's, human experiences doesn't change that much. The costumes change, the technology changes,
exactly.
The emotions, the motives, jealousy, fanaticism, as you say, love, hate, all of these things still existed. So I used a lot of what Nigeria was another. I was writing about the Middle Ages when I was in Nigeria, and I was looking around and said, "This is a medieval society. There are lords. They always had their entourages with them. They travel around in large groups. They have walls around their houses because they're afraid of the criminals. They're afraid of their enemy, their rival. It was you traveled across Nigeria with an armed escort, just as you would have in the age of the
Middle Ages, right." Right.
Because it was a dangerous environment and you had your own guards. You paid, like the embassy, we had our mobile police force that escorted me whenever I went out into the woods. And so I thought, so this gave me a lot of inspiration for writing from what I was seeing in my job. So, which doesn't change the fact that sometimes I could do nothing but think about my job, obviously.
Oh, wow. So in your research, because I know we've talked a lot about your research, because when in your content episodes, we really delved into that. But can you tell our listeners a little bit about the research, maybe something obscure that you came across in your research?
Well, it's all obscure in a way. I mean, who really cares about the Crusader kingdoms? I mean, okay, one of the things that really ignited my imagination, but I haven't been able to do effectively, is when I was visiting a castle in Cyprus. They talked about that at one point there was a civil war in Cyprus. You have to understand there was a faction that was loyal to the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who was a very dictatorial, very authoritarian figure, and he attempted to decease some of his nobles without due process. And the leader of he'd been what would you say, the bailey, like the regent of Cyprus for a minor king. And he was accused of malfeasance and was told to just give everything up. And he said, no, not without a judgment of the court. I have a right to a trial by my peers. And if you prove malfeasance, then I will, of course, step down and repay. But I demand trial. Mm-hmm. And this became the casus belli because it wasn't just him. People realized that if the regent and John the Evelyn could be just deceased, they were all at risk. And in fact, as they're later in the war, the emperor tries, just 19 barons are just told that they no longer have their baronies. It's like, wait a minute, we fought for these baronies. We've defended them for 200 years. Who are you? You don't have the right. And it really was an incredibly important war. I think historically, okay, but most people never even heard of it, right? Because Bailen de Evelyn was actually first cousin to Simon de Montfort. The English reformer, Simon de Montfort, has gone to crusade and met his cousin Bailen de Evelyn when he's fighting the emperor. So that very much the same principles that you see in Simon de Montfort have actually been when you say piloted by the Evelyn in their revolt against Frederick II. Mm-hmm. And there's much parallels, including getting the commons involved. The Evelyns also empowered. It was the commune of Accra, which supported the Evelyns. That's the common people, not just the nobility. They sat in on parliamentary sessions. They didn't go as far as Montfort in actually giving them a seat in parliament, but they had joint sessions with representatives from the commons. So there's a lot of ideas going back and forth between these cousins. So but I will you say obscure things. So I'm reading about the Civil War, and there's a case where a castle is being besieged. So they're two Christians, they're not Muslims. These are Christian forces against each other. And the Christian knights lay siege to one of the castles, and the lord of the castle is not there. He's off fighting somewhere else. And the castle is being defended, as very, very common in the Middle Ages, by the lady.
Yes.
And they call on her to, give up her arms. And her answer was, I can't, because if I surrender this castle, my husband will kill me. When he finds me, he'll kill me. His castle, if I surrender his castle, he's gonna kill me. And the knights got together and said, well, she's probably right. So they withdrew.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Talk about, wow. So here's somebody who's so known for being a brutal man that the other knights believe he would kill his own wife.
Oh, my goodness.
Chivalry, they say, all right, we won't put her into that horrible position. And withdraw.
Wow.
Now, I don't believe it. Actually, I think it's a legend, which is why I ended up not putting it into a novel. But you're talking about doing research and finding something that just, wow.
Yeah.
Hear more of Helena's interview in part 2.